Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this session, which will be presented by Tom Kunesh. The title of his presentation is On Landback and Reparations, a Proposal. I'm Paula Palmer. I'm the co-director of Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples, which is a program of Friends Peace Teams. And we are co-sponsoring the program today with Decolonizing Quakers. I'm joining you from the state of Colorado, which was originally the land of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute peoples. And also with us today is Mackenzie Barton Rolich, who is Toward Right Relationships program support staff. Mackenzie, would you like to introduce yourself? Say hello.
Hi, folks. My name is Mackenzie. I use Z, her, or she, her pronouns, and I live on the land of the Duwamish people, which is also known as Seattle.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Mackenzie will be able to respond to tech questions if they arise for you. So if you do have tech questions, please send a message to Mackenzie in the chat. A few notes now before I introduce Tom. We want to be sure that you're keeping your microphones off so that we can hear Tom's presentation and not your dogs barking. We've also set up the chat so that you can send messages only to me and to Mackenzie. Mackenzie, as I said, will help you with tech things. If you have a tech question, send Mackenzie a message in the chat. If you have a question that you want to raise with Tom during our Q&A session, which will follow Tom's presentation, send a message in the chat to me. I'll be collecting the questions, and then I will address them to Tom during the Q&A. So if you have questions, send those directly to me. Let's see, we've scheduled this program for 90 minutes and we'll hope to close on time. And Tom suggested that we take about a 10-minute break in the middle. And so when he's ready to have that break, we'll just do that and then reconvene in 10 minutes. So we didn't really know if this day, which seems to have devolved into a national day of shopping, would be a good day to offer this program, but it turns out that a lot of you were happy to come to a program like this today. So we're really pleased with that. It's heartening in more ways than one. So about Tom. I've gotten to know Tom over the last several years because we're both Quakers. And we work together on the steering committee of a group of Native and non-Native friends, which is called Decolonizing Quakers. Tom's family background is Lakota and European American. He convenes meetings of a small group of people who identify as both Indigenous and Quaker. And he also meets regularly with friends of color. In the wider Quaker world, Tom serves on the Institutional Assessment and Implementation Committee of the Ministry on Racism, which is a program of Friends General Conference. Tom holds university degrees in Spanish, religious studies, and divinity. He attends Nashville Friends Meeting in Tennessee. And I'm sure he'll tell you more about himself when he begins his presentation. Tom, feel free to do that. And he does want you to know that we will be sending you his slides after the program today, so you won't need to take notes or screenshots during the program. So welcome, Tom. Thank you again for offering this program today, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Paula. Just to let you know, folks, this is, I was expecting to address a group of 10, maybe 12 people, maybe 20 if I was lucky. And I picked this date specifically because I thought that the expectations would be low and that we could have a more intimate back and forth conversation. And then, and when Paula sent out that there were 35 spots left open, I thought, well, that's good. That's 15 people. That's a good size. I didn't know that it was out of 100. So I'll be speaking informally today, and I'll be running through these slides pretty quickly. I will be sending them out, like Paula said, and take any questions that you want and write them down and then send them to Paula and Mackenzie. Just to let you know, let's go to the, we are on Turtle Island. A friend of mine wrote and said, what is Turtle Island? And in Lakota, it's Keawita. I am not a native Lakota speaker. I grew up in Minnesota, born and raised St. Paul and then St. Cloud area. I think many of you may know where Lake Wobegon is, that area on the west side of the river. And we know snapping turtles. Snapping turtles come out of their winter hibernation. And this one is just the most beautiful picture I've ever seen of a turtle with land on it. We are on Turtle Island before this was America, before this was the United States, before Europeans were here. There was really, to the best of our knowledge, we had no name for the continent as we know it today. But people have started calling it Turtle Island, and now in recognition of European presence and the empire of Europe that first established as Spain and then France and Britain and now America, I like to refer to this area as the indigenous past of this land and its original intention as Turtle Island. Some people use another term, Abya Yala, to refer to South America, Central America. And to me, I just call it all Turtle Island. I have not been down there. Welcome to Landback and Reparations. I wrote a proposal advocating restitution to Indigenous and African American peoples. And I saw that a friend of mine, Gail Melix, had also made a proposal. And so I'm going to be talking about those two today and some other ones. So welcome to Turtle Island. My name is Tom Kunesh. I have 12 brothers and sisters. We went to mostly Catholic grade school. I went to Catholic grade school and high school, 12 years of Catholicism there. I joined the US Navy during Jimmy Carter's administration, and I was very lucky. It turns out it was the only 4 years of peace in the 20th century. During that time, I worked as a Russian and Farsi military linguist in the Persian Gulf and Indian Oceans and the Mediterranean and Spain. And then, like Paula said, I got my education at the University of Minnesota in Berkeley. I moved to Chattanooga back in 1990 for a relationship that didn't work out. And now I have 5 kids and very happy. And I worked with the Chattanooga InterTribal Association for many of those years, saving Moccasin Bend and working on other local preservation issues and also killing the local mascot. I worked with the Commission of Indigenous Affairs for the state, and I'm now with the Tennessee Ancient Sites Conservancy. Going back to my family, we are mixed blood. I heard the name hang around the forts when I was growing up. I don't know who said that, but it's not a name I heard very often, and I don't see in the literature anymore. So I figure it was a family member and talked about our relationship on or at Fort Yates and around Fort Berthold. My mom's an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Lakota Oyate, and I use Lakota words because I find them more meaningful and more respectful of culture and people who use them. And I sing in Lakota, or sweat songs. My mom's dad was born on Fort Berthold, and his mom, before then, was was born on land that was taken and then subdivided before the reservations were made, and that land was just called Dakota Territory, Dakota and Lakota Territory. And lastly, talk about lost history. Found out that we grew up in Minnesota on the old Winnebago Reservation, a reservation that was put in between the Anishinaabe to the north and the Dakota to the south, who were warring, battling so much that in the 1840s, long before the 1868 Dakota Uprising, they were still fighting, and so they tried to put in another tribe in between the two Minnesota groups. I have some pet peeves before we go talking any further. There's a word in English called kakanim. It means shit word, kakanim, bad words. And I think of these three words, Indian, Native American, and Sioux, as the three largest culprits. Indian, number one, is a cultural misappropriation of Asian people's name. Indians live in India. We who live here are not Indians. I know that it is the language of first the British, and then the Spanish, then the British, then the American Empire, to use Indian when referring to indigenous people of Turtle Island. But in our quest for people identifying themselves without using or using their own names and without using cultural misappropriations, it's better to talk about indigenous people of Turtle Island, and then also to use their First Nations name. Also, Native American. Turtle Island, like I said before, existed before America. That's a hard concept for people. If you think Indian is hard, thinking about the name of this land before America, people draw a blank. And that's one of the best reasons for using Turtle Island, and to emphasize that Native people were here before America, and that America is a European enterprise, and that the two are not synonymous. And that when you do make them synonymous, when you put Native and American together, you are essentially affirming the subjugation of that group of natives to America. And lastly, the term Sioux. Most people know that word. It's the tribe of the plains, the tribe of Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, and it's an enemy term. It was a term used by, I believe, the Anishinaabe to the south down by Michigan, who, when asked by the whites coming in, the Americans and British coming in from the east, who asked, who's that tribe on your next door neighbor tribes? They said the Nadawa Sioux, the snakes in the grass, the bad guys, essentially. And so that word was used again by Europeans to talk about a group they hadn't even met yet. And it became contracted in French to the term Sioux today. And the proper name is Lakota. If you're out west of Minnesota, usually, and Dakota in Minnesota, and there's also Nakota people. So I like to be careful that we know that we are speaking the language of empire. English is the language of the British Empire. We are members, participants, citizens of that empire, even as Americans, English speakers, and that we are using that lexicon, and we have to be careful doing that. I would say that most Native people, most indigenous people of Turtle Island don't care. I happen to. And so I would just beg your indulgence on that issue. Just to let you know, when I'm going back and forth, my eyes are traveling back and forth. It's because I have a screen over here that is feeding what you see. And then I have my phone here that says where I am in the presentation. All right. When I was young, as a Catholic boy growing up, in the back of church, we had these examination of conscience cards put out by Baltimore Catechism. We used them on Saturday afternoons when we were to examine ourselves, our minds, our souls for things that we had done wrong and things that we needed to confess to get out of our system and to say where we had done wrong. It was a weekly examination, self-examination of our moral state. We went into confession. We told the priest what was up. He said, all right, this is, maybe talked with us for a while, but then gave us some prayers and thoughts to do. And then we left, and hopefully we were cleared for communion on Sunday. I am no longer Catholic. I have great respect for some of the Catholic Church, not its sexism or its classism or its racism, but I've given up most of its language. But sin, strangely enough, for most people raised Catholic, sin is one of those things I hold on to because I do that examination of conscience quite often. And I check myself out to see if I have done something wrong, and I work on correcting it. In doing that, being mixed blood, I realized that, especially doing genealogy and seeing the number of homesteads that the white side of my family's participated in, that we participated in the land theft of the British and the American empires. And that's what I am holding myself accountable in this presentation today. I think of it as an addiction. And it's an addiction to empire, to our place, my place in it, the privilege that I get in traveling around, being a veteran. I think of our long collaboration with government, with empire, with Britain, and with our own people in Washington, D.C., that our taxes are collaboration with empire. Our voting is participation in empire. Our silent support of anything that our government does is supporting empire. And our taxes again. So I say that I and we are addicted to empire. My question to you then is, do you feel that we as individuals and we as a society, as a nation, are addicted to empire? That's the primary query today to start out with. To deal with addiction to empire, I found that the 12 Steps program has been a guiding light, a beacon, and that when we can modify it, we come up with some of the basic questions of how to address that sin that I was talking about, that sin of profiting from land theft, from genocide, and from the expropriation of people and their labor from Africa. So I focus primarily today and in this brochure, on suggesting that we, number 4, take stock of our culture of the US and UK empire, especially Pax Britannica and Pax Americana. How those two terms, Britain's peace and America's peace, have been used to colonize, settle indigenous people. The next step, number 5, to admit the wrongs of that our Anglo-American culture has created, then open ourselves to change and removal of these defects of this allegiance to empire. And then to ask others, decolonized others, indigenous people and African Americans who are less colonized and are fighting colonization, to comment on our shortcomings, on our sins, on our failures. And I think that we see that all the time, especially in demonstrations. then identify those hurt by empire, including the land and the biological societies, and then to make amends to those who we've harmed. Without doing this examination of conscience, what we end up doing is simply being liberals, bleeding heart liberals, trying to assuage our guilt and trying to give a little bit of ourselves to make us feel better. It is not engaging with the other people, with the addiction, and then with the tribes. So just as a reminder, I'm sure most of you know that land was taken in many, many different ways. Natives forced out of their houses, white people moved in, Europeans moved in, treaties that were broken, and settlers that came in on indigenous land and just took it. African Americans kidnapped, captured in Africa, sailed over here, sold, and forced to work at labor camps, on plantations. But my emphasis today, and not being African American, I don't want to focus on anything there that other people can speak better to, more directly and more heart-feelingly. I would like to talk about the 1.5 billion acres that were taken and what we can do about that. And as a reminder, I think many people are familiar with actually, I think that was the 1830 Indian Removal Act, and that was signed by Jackson in 30 and then committed in 1838. And then what a lot of people don't know is that the General Allotment Act took 90 million acres of what was written as reservation land, and then from 87 to 34, another 60 million acres as the Bureau of Land Management and other government entities especially just took land. These figures, of course, can be checked, should be checked. When we talk about Landback and how we go about doing it, I think there are three primary ways of doing it, of planning for it. And one should be asking ourselves, who is the locus, or what is the locus of responsibility? Who is responsible for this taking? Who is responsible for this profiting? Who is responsible for obtaining and using privilege? And how do we address these takings? These first three suggestions that are on your screen, first one is one of the brochures that I'm going to share with you today. These are both drafts of brochures. I would appreciate your comments and not sharing them any more widely, because they are drafts. They're not in perfect form. But one is the Native Land Reparation Pledge that Gail Melix and the Peace Abbey out in Massachusetts, I believe, worked on, that suggests that we pay 1% of or we contribute 1% of our next house sale to an indigenous tribe. There are two other plans that do something similar, and that is the Wyatt honor tax. And I looked it up, and now I'm blocking on where that is. I think it's out west. And then, of course, the Minnesota Makoche honor tax, which has been started in Minnesota. And the other ways of doing it are using the state, the force of the government, to put taxes on all land sales and taking a percentage of that tax and giving it to natives in one form or the other. And the other one is using our own community of practice, our own Friends Meeting, to commit to Landback. And the proposal I make is pretty big. So we'll go into the proposals right now. The first one is, as you can see on the bottom, from the peaceabbey.org, and with Gail Melix, who's Mashpee Wampanoag, that it's just a pledge. It's just a written commitment that when you die, when you, your spouse, your partner dies, that 1% of your home sale will be pledged to a local tribe. It's as simple as that. Money given from your land sale to the tribe. This brochure will be given to you in email following this half-hour presentation, and also you'll get these slides so that you'll have the URL to go there. The next proposal is one that I wrote up, which is that every Friends monthly meeting in the United States of America and the United Kingdom of Britain, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and other places, should return land directly. And this is the only one that refers to African Americans and land specific, and that is 160 acres, a quarter of a section of territory in the way that we figure it in our county lands. 160 acres of local area to a federally or long-standing state recognized tribe as partial compensation for land wrongfully taken from Turtle Island indigenous peoples by Europeans and the USA with Friends, collaboration, and profit. And the second one is essentially the same 160 acres of local area land. To me, it's important that it be land and that it be local and that it be given to recognized groups. This one would be African American Land Trust or civic organization like the NAACP state chapter, as partial compensation for freedom and labor wrongfully taken from African American peoples by Europeans and the USA with Friends, collaboration, and profit. This native land reparation, as you see the number 1 there, and I forgot to put the number 2 there. These are the 2 proposals. There's a third that I found out my sister has been working on up in Minnesota. She's a state legislator in the Senate, and it is called the Native Recovery Fund creation, and it suggests a surtax of 0.5% of every real estate transfer to the Native Recovery Fund. And this money would then go from the state to the Minnesota Indigenous Land Tenure Fund. Right before we came on, Paula told me that Colorado is working on much the same thing. And my sister also updated that and said there should actually be, or in the current version, there are 2 more zeros in front of that 5. So it would be 5,000ths of 1% of every real estate transfer as they try to get this bill passed. Other programs, people working on it are probably the bestest one I've seen, or I guess the one that I'm most partial to, since it's just up the river from St. Cloud up in Little Falls. Those are the people those are the nuns I think of, is the Nuns and Nuns.org land justice program of giving their land. The nuns are getting older. They own some land up there, the convent around, and they are thinking, when we die, where should this land go back to? Or who should get this land, and should it be put on the market? And they are working right now to return the land to the native peoples of Minnesota. Excuse me for these gaps. Building power, connection, imagination, and know-how among communities while they build land justice into the heart of their property plans. I thought that was such a great line that we should include it in all of our brochures and all of our discussions, and thanks to the nuns in Minnesota, to build land justice into the heart of our property plans. And that's what the Peace Abbey and Gail have done, and others. So this essentially, these are reparation plans that, in my mind, follow the 12 steps program of personal recovery from addiction, and in this case, imperial addiction to empire. And the most important things that we need to do in modifying it from addiction to alcohol and drugs and sex and rock and roll is we have to review broken treaties. And what are the stolen lands? I'm pretty good at what happened in Minnesota only from self-study, or study of Minnesota by myself, self-teaching, I should say, or reading. Most people don't know. And the same thing in Tennessee. We don't know what the treaties were. We don't know how they were broken. There were some treaties that are good, some treaties that are still valid, but I think every one has been broken. We should know how that is done, and we should examine and write that down. Which lands were stolen outright, also the liberties and the labor and the time that has not been assessed, that when we decolonize, which is really recognition that we are living in empire, and that empire has not been a good thing for Indigenous and other people, especially Indigenous and African American people, that we have stolen things, and that stolen property needs to be returned regardless of the age. Determine our level of responsibility and acknowledge and commit to material repair. These are all taken from 12 steps. I think we already went through commit land back, commit to land back to Indigenous and African American peoples, and then choose a plan. Is it going to be individual, which is really the easiest? We can take our car out and go driving and do almost anything we want as an individual. No problems involved, nobody else to ask, nobody to get involved, nobody else to execute it. We do it. The second part, the community of practice group, is much more difficult. And that's 160 acres to Indigenous people and 160 acres to African Americans. The hardest one. The easy part is thinking about it. The hardest part is doing it and making it happen. Because if you do anything other than the individual, you are going to have to choose who to work with, whether yourself or your spouse, your partner, or a group, or the state. And you are probably going to have lots of people drop out as it gets more and more problematic. And then working with others, and in this case, the others would be with Indigenous tribes, which have to be identified and then approached and a relationship built. And as many people know, or as I guess most people don't know, you don't contact a tribe like you do a corporation and say, hey, how can I give land or money back to you? It's a relationship. Lots of people don't want land from, there are some lands that they don't want, poisoned lands, bad lands, whatever. I'll dig myself into a hole here. But working with others is a very big issue. Probably the most important one is establishing a relationship with a tribe. That concludes the most important part of what I wanted to say, is what the Landback suggestions are. One is financial money and committing percentages of your income or your group's income or your state's income to Native Americans. And the second one is to give land back and to include African Americans in land back issues. So land back is only one part of all of it. Culture back, there is language back, which is being done and which is being financed by a lot of different groups and by the government. USA government itself is encouraging land back. And what is, of course, that's language back. Land back is being done, and what hasn't been discussed is really religion back. And that's, we'll save for another day. Here are some suggestions for readings. The top two are kind of difficult. Tuck and Yang, Decolonizing is Not a Metaphor, is an academic paper, as is Darity and Frank's Economics of Reparations. But Decolonizing is a concept known to the people that they were writing for. And so it might be a steep learning curve to get into that paper. The Economics of Reparations are specifically addressed to African Americans and how that would happen and who would be involved in receiving reparations and how they should be distributed. As I mentioned, Nuns and Nuns doing great work in Minnesota and other places, and that is Roman Catholic nuns, sisters, religious orders, and people who are not. Some people who are not anything, but committed to land justice. The Minnesota State Legislature, Senate Bill 3089, you can look that up. The Native Land Reparation Pledge, as I've talked about. Then the other two are the Duwamish Real Rent and the Wyatt Honor Tax, and working now also the Minnesota Makoche Honor Tax. A lot of these pauses I look at, I was a typesetter in a previous life, and I see all the mistakes I make on these slides. So they give me pause. A group that is really pretty defunct is the Intertribal Sacred Land Trust, and that was based in Tennessee with a Muskogee and Yuchi background. And the nice thing about that site is it discusses other ways of working with groups to preserve especially sacred land. And then, of course, the Indigenous Land Tenure Foundation that's been working on this issue for decades. That is it. Oh, by the way, this picture is one of my favorites. It is a temple mound here in Tennessee. When I was growing up in Minnesota, there were burial mounds down in St. Paul, and they were just nice, small, rounded mounds. And there was a series of them above on the bluff overlooking the Minnesota River. And we knew they were burial mounds, and those were the only mounds that I thought existed in the world all across Turtle Island. And then to find out that there were the mounds, the Serpent Mound in Ohio, I did not know until I was 40 some years old that there were temple mounds built essentially between the years 900 and 1500. And they are pyramids. Essentially, those were four-sided pyramids with a flat top on which there would be a temple for imagining religious, spiritual, governmental rituals. And they are found all the way from Minnesota down to the Gulf Coast, but primarily there's Aztalan in Wisconsin. Cahokia is the biggest and bestest, East St. Louis, and then Moundville down in Tuscaloosa is an absolute wonder to behold. And this is a small one, meaning I think it's 20 feet tall here in Tennessee. That is my presentation, and I was going to take a 10-minute pause and see who's here, and everybody get up and have some water, stretch your legs, and we'll be back in 10 or 15 minutes to take your questions. Feel free to write them and send them to tech support and to Paula, and we'll get right on them.
Thank you, Tom. And please do send your questions to me, Paula Palmer, and we'll resume in 10 minutes. Thank you all. Okay, friends, we are back. And well, I have quite a nice list of questions for you, Tom. Some of these are questions, some of them are actually suggestions. So we'll go through the questions first. And thank you to those of you who are posting these questions. And please continue doing that, and I'll keep checking. So about your nomenclature issues, your taconyms. There was a question right at the very beginning about Indigenous people and tribes who use the word Indian in their official names, and who use it both formally and informally to describe themselves.
You want my reaction to that, I trust.
Yes, and don't take up the entire 40 minutes with it.
No. It should be real short. There were words used by Americans and by Europeans referring to other kinds of peoples, sometimes derogatorily, and once that information, or once the sense, the feeling that it was bad was made known, the names changed. I'm just thinking of how we refer to African Americans in the 1960s and how it has changed over the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now. And that we don't use the N-word anymore. And very rarely do people say Negro. And we ask people what's the right word, and we're sensitive to African American people's use of the words, and we ask. That's what I'm asking. My family, I'm sure Nia's family and David's family, all use the word Indian back and forth. And I shudder when I think of what it means as far as adopting the language of the empire, to adopt the language of the colonizer. And if we are trying to decolonize, there's really no excuse for using those same words. But if somebody else wants to use them, my sisters who are involved in politics use them, and they know how I feel, and they feel they have to use them anyway. I don't have to use them. I'm not in government. I'm not in politics. I think we are called to be plain and simple and to speak with integrity. And that integrity is if we try to practice using people's own names for themselves, endonyms. We ask people right now, we ask people what their preferred pronouns are. If we go that far, and people change their names, and we are to say, oh, use they, or use this person's name this way, or we don't like this word when referring to people. If we can do that in other situations, there's no reason why we can't call ourselves and hold ourselves accountable for making sure that we don't practice cultural identity theft, and that we know the word Indian disguises, covers up the identity, the tribal identity of so many people and groups that, well, to say that all people are Sioux, just whitewashes all of the differences between the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Hunkpapa, the Blackfeet, the Oglala, the Santee, all of that. So that's less than 40 minutes, Paula.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions, Tom, about how these donations of 160 acres times 320 acres could be made by meetings or congregations if they don't own 320 acres, or for individuals who don't own property at all, who are renters. Can you speak to that question? What is the message? What is the appeal? What is the suggestion to people and groups who don't have property to be able to donate it?
My suggestion about the 160 acres was to groups, to many congregations that own property, have paid off their property, and oftentimes have property in metropolitan areas whose value has simply increased over the years, and they are sitting on $1 million or $2 or $3 worth of property that could be used to buy land elsewhere that a tribe might be interested in. Individuals, that is so much more difficult. I'm not sure that I would even suggest that an individual try to give or invest in property to be given back. There's a story, Paula, you may know this story better, of this rancher, was in Nebraska, who had property that was next to a river, and tribal people would come out there and visit the burials that were out there. And he and his wife were thinking of giving that land back, and then they ended up giving the whole ranch. If people have sizable pieces of property that contain sacred land, by all means do it individually. But most of us, I live on maybe 1/3 of an acre of land on a house. This house would be of no real value to the Yuchi or Muskogee on whose land this was. It would be better if I was to get involved with another group, or use that percentage of land sales, up it to 5%, and put it into the Native Land Trust, and especially one that was focused on the specific tribe in the specific area. One of the things I don't recommend is larger land trusts that wheel and deal in real estate, and oftentimes sacred lands in order to get other kinds of properties. So I don't know if that answers the question, but doing land back is better and more easily done as a group. Money back is best done by individuals.
A number of people wrote about pay the rent type programs that have been started by Native communities. I'm familiar with one in Seattle. I know that there's one also and someone wrote about one in the Bay Area. And I think there is another one in Northern California where tribes themselves are asking people to make voluntary rent payments. And this is something that you can do whether you own property or not. But you can make voluntary payments on a monthly or yearly basis to the Indigenous nation that lived on the land where you currently live, either in times past or currently. So anyway, there were just a number of suggestions that people have been making for people who are not themselves property owners. And Tom had talked about one of those programs too. So there are a couple of people are asking, how did you come up with the 160, the magic number 160 acres? What were the thoughts that led you to?
That was, when I looked at the farms that the Kunesh family owned in Nebraska and northern Minnesota, and then the ones that the Wenish family owned in outside of North St. Paul, Minnesota, they were all 160 acres. And it seemed to be a standard of the Homestead Act was to get start out with 80 or 160 acres or build up to 160 acres. Later, one of the farms was merged with another one when the boy and girl who lived next door, they made a 320 acre farm out of theirs. But that's where the magic number comes from. It's a section of land. It's a quarter section of a mile. Oh, I think it is called a quarter section. So it's a magic number when it comes to land sales and settlements, settlers and homesteading in the West. I don't know what it was out East.
We do have someone who's saying 160 acres is 1/4 of a square mile. So that's how that got written probably into the Homestead Act.
I'm trying to think of how many square miles is it to make a township. I was going over all of these facts and figures of what makes what. And what surprised me was how many square miles it makes is a township. I'm not sure if it's 6 or 12. But anyway, nothing magic really about it, just the way it was subdivided.
A question. Where is this question? What if my state had no recognized indigenous groups?
I love that one. In Tennessee, there was no federally recognized tribe. There was a tribe that had migrant workers coming in from Mississippi, the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. About 50 to 100 people used to do migrant labor about 100 miles north of Memphis. And they kept doing it year after year that the tribe finally bought some land and put a community center there, then a school, and then a health clinic. And then they ended up buying the land. And they held it in fee simple deed. And then they asked for it to be put into trust. So now the one federally recognized tribe in Tennessee is the Mississippi Band of Choctaw. The removed tribes, the Eastern Band of Cherokee was never removed. They stayed in North Carolina. The Cherokee Nation was removed. The Yuchi and Muskogee were removed from Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. There were people here 1,000 years ago that were tribal. We don't know what their names were 1,000 years ago. There is a really good map. It's out of the University of Nebraska called a First Contact tribal map. And in it, the Smithsonian mapped out the contact areas of all the first peoples that were met by Europeans. I can put that information, I can send that information along to you. So from that map and any treaty that was that covers the area where you live, let's say Kentucky. Kentucky had tribes in the years 1700, 1800, and those tribes were removed. Ohio, Indiana, the tribes were removed and they can still be contacted. They still exist. And most of them have been removed west of the Mississippi to what was called Indian Territory and live there. I would love to see land, 1,000 acres here in Tennessee, return to the Yuchi and Muskogee. That map is really interesting. It shows in the center of Tennessee this place marked as Yuchi, and then all around it, white. No tribes. The Barrens, it's called. And what it means is that when white contact first happened in the 1500s, in the 1600s, that whole area was empty of natives. They had all died. Tennessee, I don't know if you guys know, had the most extensive inland contact from Hernando de Soto's walk through Tennessee and Georgia and Alabama, up Mississippi, up to the Mississippi River in 1540. And from that one excursion, they theorized that millions died. So the point of this is that if you don't know who your tribes are, there are maps. One is that map from the University of Nebraska, First Contact Native Languages map. The second one is put out by Canada that shows areas that are covered by treaties and language groups. So I will make sure that those two references are included in the next email that we send out. Good?
Great, thank you, Tom. There's a question about your language, Tom, in saying that these donations of land should be made to federally recognized tribes or long-standing state-recognized tribes. Can you explain what you mean by long-standing state-recognized tribes? What are the issues there?
This is one of my favorite, one of the areas I know most about, because Tennessee has 6 fake tribes. So I'm not addressing especially the tribes of the East Coast that went through wave after wave of immigration by Europeans primarily, and loss, cultural loss, language loss, religion loss. I'm talking about tribes that were created in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Once Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee and Touch the Earth and a bunch of other books came out, once the Crying Indian, Iron Eyes Cody came out on TV, became very popular to identify as indigenous. Tennessee saw 100 tribes sprout up, people claiming, 100 different groups claiming to be Native American and descendants, and 6 of them in the year 2000, 1999, 2000, officially requested from the state of Tennessee to be recognized as Native American tribes. I had been on the Commission of Indi Affairs. I had been voted out, and by these groups, and I now have a strong bias against tribes that were created late or after the 70s in order to cash in on so many changes that were happening, whether it was education monies coming to counties. That happened in Alabama and Georgia and was attempted here in Tennessee. One of the problems is that they get involved, these groups that claim to be tribes get involved with sacred sites and cultural and human remains returns, and they presume to have an equal voice with the tribes that were removed from here. And to demonstrate it, you can look up the Cherokee, let's see, is it the Cherokee tribe of Lawrence County of Tennessee. And they had applied to the BIA for federal recognition, as they applied to the state of Tennessee for state recognition. And they were reviewed and they were found to be lacking any Native American identity, and that the reservation that they said they lived on turned out to be a reservation for revolution that the United States of America had made in the late 1770s, early 1780s, I believe it was, to pay Revolutionary War veterans with land. And so it was just called a reservation, meaning the United States was involved in land speculation and they wanted to put veterans, military veterans, out on the frontier. So that's my bias about long-standing state-recognized tribes. I know that there were tribes that were terminated. I'm not counting them. Tribes that have been in existence for a long time and not recognized, like in Virginia, in the Carolinas. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking specifically about tribes that have sprung up in Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, that claim to be real but are not.
Is there a way for people who want to make conscientious decisions about land back? Is there a way for them to assess the legitimacy of a tribe if it, yeah. How can people know this?
If it's not a federally recognized tribe, then I would ask a federally recognized tribe member what they think of that other tribe. Now, there are tribes like the Lumbee is a great example that get badmouthed by other tribes. I'm reminded that Vine Deloria in the National Congress of American Indians went to bat for the Lumbee tribe of, I think it's North Carolina, and they do not have full recognition. So how a person knows is, have they been state recognized, and have they ever applied for state recognition, and what is the history of their petition. And if they claim to be one thing, find out who their relatives are and ask them what other tribes, if you claim to be Cherokee, what do the other Cherokees say about you? If you claim to be Saponi or Ponca or something, ask who else would know and get their opinion.
Thank you. That's helpful. Could you talk a little bit about the different concepts of land ownership between the British, American concept of land ownership and titling and all of that, and the way that the indigenous people of Turtle Island have understood land ownership or practiced land ownership?
I'm not a property thinking kind of guy, and this has been addressed by other people so much better than me. But this is a constant argument that some people say, well, Native people didn't own lands, and I just don't see that. When I look here in Tennessee and we see the Temple Mound, and we know where the houses were built around it. You can go to Cahokia, you can go to the places out in the Pueblos in the Southwest. You can see that people had their own land. They had their own property where they farmed, they extended it. And in many places, like right here where that picture was taken, they even put palisades around it to say, this is ours, and we know that people come here and fight us for this land, and we're saying, this is ours. Don't cross this or you'll die. So we know that there was personal property. We know that there was communal property. Beyond, we do know that, to the best of our knowledge, we don't have records of what property was. To say that the understanding was so much different from any European or Asian or African sense that nobody owns land, I just don't get. I just don't buy. people fought for land, people fought for their territory to stay, especially where they buried their dead. I don't know if you guys know that here in Tennessee, where there are Muskogee graves, sites, people buried their relatives in their own house, in a corner of the house. So that's what pot hunters go looking for, is those house corners where people, families would put their honored ancestors and see if there's anything in there for them to take. As far as land areas go, that is so flexible. You know, we could talk about where is Flanders, where is the Netherlands, who owns what in Spain, the Basque Country. That the territories have moved, yes. The boundaries have moved, yes. But peoples together still owned or had the feeling that they owned areas of land. This land here was sold by the Cherokee, who, let's see, Knoxville is 200 miles away. No, I think 150 miles away from here. They didn't really cross the Cumberland Plateau and live over here. They considered this hunting land, and yet they sold it because, you know, it's like me selling your house. I'm happy to take $100,000 for and write you a receipt for the sale of your house. As a friend of mine says, he never said that the Cherokee were right, he just said that they were good real estate agents for the tribe.
Tom, there's a question here and maybe a suggestion at the same time about the mechanics of taking the pledge to donate 1% of the value of sold property. And the question has to do with, can that commitment be passed down to the people who purchase your property, and then when they go about selling it, can that commitment of 1% go down the line from property owner to property owner? Had you thought anything about that?
I don't know who would do that, because I don't think that, well, future promises of unknown people aren't upheld. Where I lived in Chattanooga, there was an item in the original deed that said that our house could not be sold to African Americans, to Negroes. And that's simply unenforceable today. And so suggesting that you can always suggest to the next owner that they make the same commitment, so that over 100 years, 100% would be paid in. But you cannot, to the best of my knowledge, you cannot write that in. Or if you do write it in, the other person has to agree to it. And I don't know who would do that.
Okay. I'm going to read this question. It's from a friend of yours, Tom. But I'm just going to read it as it is in the chat. If you don't mind, or would you like us to know, please share how you protect your heart, mind, soul, and spirit as or when you continuously find yourself sharing and repeating information, ideas, and education. There's a little more here. How, why do you do it? Give of yourself in such a deep way.
Well, I like sitting quietly in a group. That doesn't matter who. And tomorrow I get to go sweat, and that's healing. That's wonderful. And we don't talk about any of this at all. I don't know if they even know I'm doing this, but That's a really good question. I'd have to think about it a lot more and make a convoluted answer. I don't know why I do what I do. It was, well, I was invited to join the InterTribal Association. And the guys who did it, Alva Crow, Eastern Band of Cherokee, and John Anderson of Six Nations, Anishinaabe and Mohawk, asked me to join that group. And I did. And I thought that I was this little shithead from Minnesota, mixed blood, not worth, a lesser blood, not worth anything. And these were full bloods. And it turns out that I think pretty well, and I'm good at research, I think. And it also that I was being told and fed false information. And it took me 7-10 years to realize how false the information was and then to react to it. And so that's one of my motivations. Like Chief Makanuga, who was a mascot down in Chattanooga, I just found it offensive. And others found it offensive. You know who found it most offensive? It was the Black Student Association. And they were the biggest, bestest allies at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And the worst, the people who defended it the most was the Greek fraternities and sororities. So, but otherwise, I don't know why. And I figured I trained for the ministry. I know there's a person or two here who remembers who was in school with me out in Berkeley. And I think it was my dad. And I think that's why my sisters are involved in politics and my brother and stuff, is that we got a really good sense from our mom about Indigenous, even though she had never gone back to the reservation. And my dad, who was an attorney and was consistently, he was a children's and support services attorney, was constantly telling us about the problems in the legal system. And that's the way we went. So I don't know what else I can say. I'll just have to think about that some more.
I want to read another. It is a question, but it also leads into something that we were talking about before the program started today. And this is our concluding question, because then we have a couple announcements, and we also would like all of you to fill out an evaluation form. It's important to fill out this evaluation form for two reasons. One is so that we can learn from you, but the other is that it gives you a chance to tell us if you would like to continue to be involved in Toward Right relationship with Native peoples work in various different ways. So we have a form that's an online form. We'll put a link in the chat so that you can fill that out. So please don't leave until you've done that. And I want to read this one last question to give Tom a chance to offer a suggestion that he would like to make. So this says, Tom, thank you for your presentation. I want to start right away to make a difference in these challenging moral, historical, present, and persistent justice matters for restoration and reparations and land back. But I don't want to be alone in my efforts. Do you know a way I can find a witness or ally or someone from the representative group to accompany me? So, Tom, do you want to share your thought about bringing this group of people? There have been 76 of us on this call back together in sometime in the spring.
Yes. I think the hardest thing, there are a couple people on here we have been meeting together now for 3 years talking about decolonizing. And it is the biggest, bestest, well, not the biggest, but the best support group. We read decolonizing, we talk decolonizing, and get different perspectives. It is so hard to do things alone. And I would like us to consider getting back together in 3 to 4 months. We have a mailing list, and especially to identify people who are in different areas, so that people in Middle Tennessee and I would be put together, people in Northern California might be grouped together, and that we could start thinking about forming our own little groups, our own collectives, and finding out what's going on locally, and to meet each other either at meetings, friends meetings is what I mean, or other regional gatherings, to talk about what we can do and what institutions and organizations we could use. We didn't ask each other, or we didn't ask from the organizing perspective, your state. And so that's something that I would like to ask in the future in registration, is to identify where you are at and to put people together ourselves, and then to meet together and talk about what we're doing. So to your question, yes, we hope to be to help you find people close to you to be allies. And I think Paula's group, if you guys don't know, or the Quaker Peace Team Towards the Right Relationship is working on that issue too, right, Paula? And so let's get together in 3-4 months and see what you've come up with, and to see if we can group ourselves with friends who are going that same way or want the same thing. Paula?
Thanks to both of you for that suggestion. And yes, Mackenzie is our tech miracle worker, and she'll help us find ways of doing that. And so thanks for that nudge in a direction that I think will be very useful. So Mackenzie has a couple announcements to make, and then we'll close and ask you to fill out the evaluation form. Mackenzie?
Thank you, Paula. So I just put in the chat a list of resources that Tom put together before this presentation. At the bottom is a folder. So all of them are in that folder. If you just want one link to save, it's that very last one. This will all go out via email as well. So no need to save everything here if that's not easy. I also am putting in the chat the doables document. So this is something that the organization that Paula and I work with, Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples, has put together, of like, to sort of answer the question, like, what do I do now? And then I'd like to invite David Raymond to say a thing or two about his upcoming talk, the information for which I will also put in the chat.
Thank you, Mackenzie, and thank you, Tom. So on Monday, December 4th, in the evening, I'll be presenting a talk called Assimilate or Be Exterminated. And I know that sounds very disturbing. It is kind of disturbing, but it kind of goes along with what Tom was saying about confessions. And so I was really interested in, maybe like a child, I wanted to know, why did Quakers participate in cultural eradication? And but the Indian committees, the so-called Indian committees of the yearly meetings, they did put forward why they were involved in this. And so I want to take us through some of that history, and in the words of Quakers of that era, going all the way to the present, and also what impact this had on my own spiritual journey and my own kind of Quaker life. So I hope yeah, I would love it if some of you would join me for that program. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I think Mackenzie has put in the chat a link to the registration page for David's talk. And then we have other upcoming webinars in January and February. Mackenzie, do you want to announce those too?
Sure, yeah. So we have Dr. Nia to go there, who's Cree, is going to talk to us in a series of 4 webinars about culture, colonization, healing, and moving forwards, like building a future that is a little more hopeful than what we've got going on at the moment. So I put the link to register for that first module into the chat, and you can find all the other modules directly from there as well. And then I think all I have left is the evaluation form. Paula, do you have any other announcements?
You can go ahead and put the link to the evaluation form in the chat so that all of you are able to see that, and you will just click on that and then go ahead and fill it out. And let's give Tom our deep appreciation, and this is our Quaker thanks. Our silent applause for your presentation, Tom. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us. And as Tom said, we will be sending some messages out to you by email, and we'll hope to see you again first at David's talk, and then at Nia's talks, and then at a reconvening of this group in early spring. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Mackenzie.
Thank you.
Hi, Nia. Hi, David. Hi, Jorge.